Hello and welcome to another episode of the MMA Hangout, a solo edition, today on SevereMMA.com. And this one looks more locally towards the Irish MMA scene of 2014. All in all, a very good year, in my opinion. We had some great fights, some great amateur fighters, and you see a lot of them who have finally made the progression onto pro. And we're just going to go over a couple of things now, maybe for the next 15 to 20 minutes. We'll try to get a little bit shorter. I know a lot of these things, people don't really like when they go on for too long, so enough of that. But before we get to anything mixed martial arts related, a massive congratulations to John Sheridan and Patrick Sheridan, who announced today that they will be running the Irish qualifier for the Abu Dhabi Pro Trials on the 15th of February in Dublin. Now, for those that don't know what this is, just to let you know how big it is, the Abu Dhabi Pro Trials are held in Abu Dhabi every year. There's massive money at stake relatively in terms of jiu-jitsu, and all around Europe and the world there are trials for people to be able to enter and get all expenses paid trips to these competitions. John pitched to the commission, to the Sheikh or whoever it was himself, and he was chosen to host the Irish trials. There's going to be 10 all-inclusive paid packages up for grabs. That means, if I was looking at it from the outside, if I'm guessing now, I would say white belt absolute, blue belt under 75 and over 75, purple maybe a whole absolute, brown could be split, black could be split, and white belt female. I think that takes you up to about 10. That's just me looking at it from this point of view, because blue belt is probably going to be the largest division. A lot of great blue belts in Ireland that will be competing for that, so 2 tickets may be the best option for them there. Then again, purple belt, also a lot of people being promoted to it recently, and there not being too many brown belts actively competing. I think a lot of them will come out of the woodwork for this. It's going to be a great day of jiu-jitsu in Ireland. And the other side of that is that John has said a lot of profits that will be made from the tournament will go in towards selecting an Irish squad. So from what the Facebook page post implied today, it would mean that if you don't win the ticket, you win a spot on the Irish team, which means maybe your trips for an IBJJF tournament or the British Open would be covered. And they're selectively looking a lot at white belts for a lot of these places. 65, 75, 85, 95, and over 95 kilos. So that is massive. It'll give people experience. I know when I was a white belt, I only traveled to one tournament. It was the Europeans. This year has been different, traveling a lot as a blue belt, but it would be great. Like, I know for me anyway, after doing the Europeans as a white belt, twice, it actually was just the case of no other tournaments kind of phased you as much as that. So if that's what they're going for, that's brilliant. Let's get the support. Let's get behind them. Any Irish BJJ players that are watching this, pencil the dates in your diary. The 15th of February, massive day for Irish BJJ, and looking forward to that in the new year. So let's talk. First things first. I put it up on my Facebook page today. What did you want me to talk about? Some people said same day weigh-ins for amateur fighters. It was Joe McCogan. I agree and I disagree to this in many points of view. I do think it's a great idea for beginner level amateur guys on certain types of shows, more than likely Sunday afternoon shows in a hall. We'll get to that later on. But I don't see the point of someone like Joe himself, Io Daly, Thomas Hogan, Tommy Martin, established amateurs that could be going pro in the near future, doing same day weigh-ins, because you need to start getting ready for it. You can't take your first pro fight and do your first weight cut. You know, you need to be maybe getting a little bit into this and taking it a little bit more seriously when you're progressing towards the end of your amateur career, shall we say, before you make the jump to pro. There's always going to be the 1 out of 10. There's always going to be the one person that isn't informed, that doesn't know what they're doing, that will try cut weight and compete on the same day, even though there are countless amounts of evidence out there to show that it's a bad thing. And the Royal College of Surgeons for Beaumont, the event that Professor Dan Healy and John Kavanagh are organising on January 24th, is going to be a massive thing. It's going to talk about weight cutting, head injuries, why it's so important. And I think it's going to be very well attended from a lot of clubs. So maybe that will kind of bring the overall level and knowledge of it up in the country. But I really do think that while I agree with same day weigh-ins at a grassroots level is essential, and I think it is something that I would like to see more of in 2015, I disagree at it from the point of guys that are on the verge of turning pro, or like more experienced amateur guys that now need to start getting into this sort of system. And then again, I don't like them doing it crazy. I like what Tommy Martin's doing, what Tommy Martin has suggested a lot of fighters do. Instead of cutting down to 66, why not just fight regularly and fight at 70. Fight the 66ers at 70, so you don't have to cut much weight. So nothing like that is a problem. It takes the stress out of a fighter's life. And really, that's all we want to do happening, for them to be enjoying themselves and having fun, keep coming back and spreading the word of mixed martial arts in Ireland. Someone else has asked for top 5 fights, finishes, and fighters. Admittedly, to my own shame, I don't think I could do that in an extensive list and be fair to all the great amateur fights that happen in Ireland. One of my, I don't want to say New Year's resolutions, because Graham from SevereMMA would kind of be expecting me to do it next year anyway, but literally every single Irish MMA amateur event, every single Irish MMA event I want to be at, I want Severe to be at in some form or another. And I know there are guys on that have shows on the same date. We will have to prioritise, but 2015 in terms of local coverage is going to be our biggest one yet. As amateur fighters know, we now do fight highlights as well as the interviews, and that is something that we've noticed a spike in a lot of our views. And even then, the carry on from people that subscribe to our channel for the McGregor or UFC content, they're starting to watch the local show. So it's massive exposure for these guys. You're now seeing like local fighter interviews with good highlights getting maybe upwards of 1,000 views, when maybe a year ago you would have been lucky to get maybe 200 and that. So that's just for scale purposes. So for me, the top standouts in a lot of the divisions this year, if we're looking towards the lower weight divisions, Paul Hughes at 125, Ryan Curtis at 125, Paddy McGee at 125. He had a very good year, 3 submission wins, all in the first round. In my opinion, he just lost out to Io Daly as Amateur Fighter of the Year. Reese McKee had a very good year. A bad, not say a bad loss, but a tough loss against Ben Sheehan. It seems he learned a lot from it. His mindset seems to have changed from talking to him and now actively getting involved in refereeing in the country, which I think is absolutely fantastic thing to see for the teenage and lower level amateur fights. Definitely something I'd like to see more of. Just, you know, people are complaining about referees, and now we finally have someone stepping up, comes to do it. Adam Cafferty had a good year early on, then went over to Prague, I think it was, recently, and won. He is the one that I think maybe the next to turn pro, at least at a Rush Fight Academy. He probably will be joined by maybe 2 of his teammates that had great years as well, Thomas Hogan and Paul Lawrence. I think the question for Hogan is definitely we want to see him go pro now. He has lost 1 fight as an amateur to Richie Smullen. Sorry for leaving that out in my last post-fight interview with him. He was armbarred at Cage Warriors, but when he's gone against guys, he has looked very impressive, and I would love to see him, what he could do at pro, especially and sign maybe an organisation in the UK or Europe. Paul Aylmer from Cork as well. Dissed him in an interview. Didn't make its way to YouTube a while ago, so I'm sorry about that, but he looked very good at sprawl, dropping his opponent with body kicks. Really good. Unfortunately, a lot of the Cork team have been a little bit quieter. You know, you've Will Fleury, who had a very good year as well, but he also, I'm not saying they had a bad year, but it was more the case of Sean Tobin being out for a little while, Darren O'Gorman sitting out for a little while, and then the 2 transitioning to pro. So the fabled amateur team from Cork kind of has now starting to turn into the pro team. So we're going to have to see how that goes in 2015. Definitely a storyline that I'm looking forward to watching. If anyone could update me, I'm not too sure what's happened. Valdrim Lubistani, I think he did put something on his Facebook page about having to leave Ireland. Always a talent that I loved watching. A shame that we never got to see the Valdrim Lubistani Luke Cafferty match. Luke has gone away to London, I believe, and from what I've heard, he's just completely fallen out of love with the sport. Wasn't training too much, didn't really enjoy it anymore. And sorry if I'm paraphrasing here, but definitely one of the top prospects in Ireland that I've ever seen. Some of the best hands from an amateur fighter. An absolute shame if he does decide to walk away from the sport. Then again, Irish MMA has been littered with those guys throughout the past. Franz Milambo had an absolutely excellent year at amateur. From the guy who was getting taken down, didn't have much grappling, didn't look always that good, apart from his great hands and striking, has really turned it around. Being pushed up against the cage by heavier opponents, getting out of it, reversing it, taking them down, finishing them with ground and pound, winning by submission. Completely different fighter. Definitely someone who's stuck in the gym, kept his head down. From that as well, Tommy Martin and Dylan Logan from SPG also. Tommy, who went through a little bit of a tough time in terms of confidence, has really turned it around recently. Definitely want to see how he does next year, because you always heard great stories about him coming from the gym, and just kind of stepped away, started competing and beating me in jiu-jitsu tournaments, and definitely want to see how that goes. Dylan Logan as well, who I believe won Amateur Fighter of the Year in SBG. Stayed quite active. As Lee Hammond would like to point out, very exotic kicks from Dylan Logan in some of his fights. He has the karate background. Although he did find it very hard to get matched. In 2014, Declan McAleenan as well, coming from a karate background, has really improved the times that I've seen him. I know I have a little bit more knowledge of how he trains, considering we train in the same gym. But bias aside, I think some of the up and coming guys in the north that I get to see more of just through training through different gyms are really progressing at an alarming rate. And I think next year, not that you want to start at any sort of north versus south thing, but there could be some excellent cards if we match fighters from the top from the north against the top from the south. Because, for example, I was talking about events coinciding with each other. I believe Chaos and the Rumble and Rush are going on the same day in February. It's not really something you want to see. And if I think the dates are correct, it's the 21st of February. I may be in London competing anyway. The IBJJF have the London Winter Open. But it's definitely not something that you want to see when guys are co-promoting shows against each other. And when you could get more stacked cards. Because some of these shows that are charging money for largely amateur fight cards, I would pay that money if there were maybe 15 amateur fights on it, as opposed to 8 on a pro fight. No, that's not things that we want to see anymore. We don't want to dilute the market as it is. Losing train of thought there. That's another rant for another day. I mentioned Will Ferry. Of the higher end of things, there wasn't much to talk about apart from Keena Rocked. Great year from him. You saw him kind of go against guys earlier on that just seem to be guys that train MMA and yeah, I'll have a fight. But his last fight was against a guy from Gracie Baja, Northern Ireland. Very energetic, the same as Keane. Great shape, great power. Keane came through it and looked very good while doing it. So definitely, like, he's always tweeting at EFC Africa. I don't know if he's looking to turn pro soon, and maybe John's looking to get him out there alongside Peter Queally. But he's definitely got a good future ahead of him in 2015. Something I would definitely be looking forward to. A lot of other Irish guys I'm definitely forgetting. I mentioned James Gallagher. He returned this year. James put a lot of great wins together this year. He's calling out a lot of people for early next year. He's just putting it down to just getting in there and having fun and learning as much as he can. He's living with John. He's training every day in SBG. It's definitely something that we want to see. Although the one thing I would be worried about, and I know it's not my position, that's just what's going to be thrown back at me, that I don't fight, I don't strike, I don't compete in mixed martial arts, is that James has, like, he's an excellent grappler. I know that. I've been submitted by him. His striking, though, it seems that he will grow into this style because it's what he's doing every day with the sort of training with Gunnar, like going over to Iceland, Connor with the hands up. I know a lot of people were critical about that at events, listening to people talk about James Gallagher. I think he'll grow into that style, but you've seen him take a lot of shots. I think it was that fight. He won by toe hold ultimately in the Palace nightclub in Navan, but he did get a lot of shots that came through the guard, as well as the Cage Warriors fight against Matthew Mullen. And these are the things, you know, it's great that these things are happening to him in amateur, because next year we're going to see an improved version of it. Maybe tighter striking defense, more slick attacks. And I would like to see him just but really, really show people how good a level of grappling it is. And maybe in his head, it's thinking, well, I know I have that to fall back on. Let's get some flashy strikes in there. And he's thrown them and he's landed them. And I think 2015 could be a pretty big year for James Gallagher. And a lot of people would like to fight him ASAP. And finally, for SevereMMA's Amateur Fighter of the Year, Io Daly, he's the perfect example of someone who I think has really just changed it all around. He moved to Team Rhino. He got his act, I don't want to say he got his act together, but he really started putting it together. Great wins. We'll claim SevereMMA got him onto the Cage Warrior show after he made a bit of a plea last year at a Ryushin show to get put onto the Cage Warriors card. It worked. He's done very well. Then under Randy Ryan, he's done very well. He beat Kiefer Crosby this year in probably one of my favorite fights of the year. Very quick, very exciting. And Kiefer is definitely a top prospect at 170 as well. Love watching him. And I love his mindset and attitude towards training as a whole. Someone else asked about the amateur formats to replace the MMA League. I've heard rumors that the MMA League is no more. Wasn't able to just find anything definite there before we came on air. And the MMA League has had some of the most, like people like Chris Fields, etc., have gone through the MMA League. Tom King as well, although he's now focusing on winning black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions. It is something that needs to stay in Ireland. I definitely think so. But there does need to be a step between the MMA League and Saturday night fee-paying shows in front of crowds with full bar and drink available. I don't think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. Hopefully it will be addressed. The prerogative lies with the coaches knowing when a fighter is ready or not ready to go on to that sort of thing. And that's where you have the sort of aspect of, well, who's a legitimate MMA club, who isn't a legitimate MMA club. So my opinion and suggestion would be matted shows, Sunday afternoons, maybe stick a cage up, maybe run them side by side with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions in Ireland. Relaxed atmosphere, you show up, you look the same size as you two fight each other. But you've only fought twice, that's okay. This guy's fought 4 times. You're a little bit heavier, but you've only fought twice. So you come and fight this guy who's fought 4 times, but he's lighter than you. Different things like that is how I would like to see it happen in the near future. And definitely emphasis on stopping the fight straight away. We've seen some absolutely horrendous calls in Irish mixed martial arts this year, and from the refereeing point of view, amateur fighters taking too much damage than needed. We've seen towels thrown in, like from coaches, and it is very tough to watch when you're sitting cage side and seeing the physical damage, especially now that we're starting to know more about brain injuries, and you see it, some fighters getting punch drunk later on in their careers. You don't want that to start happening in fighters at such an early level at amateur. So definitely the emphasis on the stoppage. And then you have, you know, some coaches that just won't get in line with that, you know, and I'm sorry to point it out. I'm not making a deal of it. I'm not pointing him out individually, but I am, because it's the incident I most saw recently. Paul Kaiser started refereeing. He was refereeing that sprawl, and Tony Carrick from Lucan got in his face, started screaming at him, shouting at him, "That's bullshit. No way. That's a ridiculous call." His fighter's arm was hyperextended and about to break. I was sitting right next to the cage. I was sitting on a stage watching it. And, you know, these amateur fighters have to go to work on Monday morning. That's the worst thing. Or they have to go to school or college. And that whole, "oh, let it break, bro" mentality of, you know, don't tap, let it snap. It's just, it's not professional prize fighting. Yeah, fair enough. You do that. It's your income. It's the difference between maybe getting to the UFC, or if you're in the UFC, getting a title shot or going further up the rankings. But amateur fighters, you lose, that's fine, no problem. You learn from it. You go back in the gym and you get back out there as quick as possible. So, as I said, it's definitely something I want to see rid of. Coaches just need to start working in unison with referees. Like some gyms take wins over other gyms as a big thing. It's not. At the end of the day, I know there was a time when people thought if they beat someone from SPG, it was great. It was like, well, sorry, it's not that big of a thing. Or like from a bigger gym like Team Rhino, or I don't like to see it, and hopefully that starts to get eradicated slowly as well into 2015. A few more things before we finish up. Who do I think should step up to pro after their 2014 performances? I said it earlier, Thomas Hogan, without a doubt. Io Daly, I believe, is going pro now. This is his next fight. Joe McColgan had 1 fight out this year. He lost to Lloyd Manning. Lloyd also only had 1 fight this year. Definitely something I'm looking forward to seeing more of in 2015. But Joe has been injured for a while. A while ago, I remember there was the time that all the guys up in FI were calling him the SPG Hunter. He beat James Heelan in a cage contender, and that was, you know, we all thought he was going pro after that, and then stepping away and coming back. So definitely, I think a pro debut is in line in 2015 for him. Ryan Curtis mentioned to me actually about maybe going pro after his next fight. I think his striking is absolutely lovely. Some really, really nice combinations in the 125 division. There are a couple of guys that like to see matched up before he maybe goes pro. But and his submission defense, I think a better guy than his last opponent, or a better submission artist than his last opponent, could have put him away. He put him in some bad situations, and that's something that kind of needs to be addressed. Exciting matchups for 2015 based on performances in 2014. Paul Aylmer versus Reese McKee is one that comes straight to mind. Definitely want to see that. And then kind of an interchangeable foursome of James Gallagher, Franz Malambo, Mark Andrew, and Decky McAleen. And I think Mark Andrew had an absolutely great year as well. Him and Reese, both teammates. So any of those guys getting in and out with each other. Carl McNally coming back now in 2015 as well. Kind of the 1 fight as well this year. Then in and out of training, I believe, with work and different things like that. Keep getting told 2015. At one point, SevereMMA's highest view total video on YouTube was Carl McNally for his epic cartwheel kick at Clan Wars last year. So there are a couple of guys that you want to kind of see come in and out and back into the scene and just interchange match up with each other. Like if James Gallagher fought Decky McLean in March, I'd like to see him fight Mark Andrews in April. You know, just get in and out, get as much fights as possible. And ultimately, it's the Irish MMA fans and the public that will benefit from all of these, as well as the fighters from the learning experiences. One thing that does need to be addressed, in my opinion, though, is the amount of amateur titles that are around. I don't really want to see it go down the ISKA route, where there's the one-handed rock, paper, scissors ISKA champion for amateur Pro B fighter with only 4 fingers or something like that. There's more belts than, I don't know, in the ISKA floating about at the minute. So I don't want to see them. And I know there are MMA fighters that have ISKA belts. Leave that to kickboxing. Let's get rid of it. Stop bringing them into MMA. It doesn't add any credibility to your event. You know, some amateur fighter isn't going to get an extra sponsorship or a sponsorship because he has an ISKA belt. You know, so let's just leave it at that. If promotions want to have amateur belts, that's fine. And I don't see a problem with that because they're trying to, grow as a promotion so it looks like they have some validity. But in terms of all of the ISKA stuff and being defended on different shows, just leave that shit behind and let's move forward together in 2015. The top 5 amateur fighters to look out for and the top 5 pro for 2015. Didn't really give this one too much thought. Alex Brophy had a great debut recently at Battlezone, as did Jack Sheridan. Interesting to see how those two go on in 2015. Carl McNally coming back as well as someone who I want to look out for. Just trying to think because I mentioned Alex and Jack because they're the guys that would have benefited from grassroots stuff maybe 6 months ago, but they're from well-established gyms who've put them through K1 fights, jiu-jitsu tournaments. Alex especially is a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, a very good blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and we saw it. He maybe wasn't that used to getting hit and then pulled out a great armbar victory. Owen Drumgool as well as another guy definitely that we want to look out for in 2015. Had a very good year under John Redden's Malahide martial arts, and we'll see what happens with him, I suppose. In terms of pro, I am thinking about doing another episode of this, more focusing towards the pro side of Irish MMA and the year in general as a whole. But for me, Sean Tobin had a great fight against Neil Ward. The two of them guys are going to have good 2015s. Neil Ward made a great pro debut earlier on in the year. Cage Warrior 65 knocking out Gavin Kelly. And that was pretty much a statement from him. Haven't heard a lot about Keith Cody in a while. I do think he's just getting his head down, getting back to training. There is the controversy up in the air. I don't know if it was ever resolved about if his fight with Paul Kauser was made a amateur or professional fight. If it was made professional, then Keith is actually 0-2 as a pro, I believe. So that is definitely his next fight is going to be pretty influential for him. You don't want to go 0-3 at the start of your career. So, and he's a very talented guy, and looking forward to seeing what he is, because in my opinion, undoubtedly him and Darren O'Gorman were the two top 135ers at amateur anyway in the country, before they turned pro. And other pro fighters to watch out for, they're going to have good years. Kieran O'Brien and Tommy McCaffrey, both at 145. Big things. Tommy, both are signed with Cage Warriors. Their paths may cross at a future date, but until then, I do think Tommy is a little bit more higher ranked than Kieran. I would like to see it happen just because of their styles would match up very well and make for a very exciting fight. Tommy had a great win against Dean Riley earlier on in the year in Cage Warriors 70, I believe, in August in Dublin in the Helix. So that is something we're going to see. But, you know, there are so many guys coming through the pro ranks now, starting to come through, like Niall Smith as well, and starting to turn pro, as I mentioned, like Neil and Sean, that you do want to see more of, fight more regularly and fighting on these local shows. And I hope we come back to it next year where we start seeing more pro fights. And I suppose it is a good chance now to introduce the newest segment that we're going to be debuting on SevereMMA in the new year. Myself, more than likely myself anyway, and we're going to get other people involved, are going to be looking back on some of the top Irish MMA fights of all time. Similar to Joe Rogan Fight Companion, we'll tell you when to pause it, we'll talk over it, we'll give our analysis on it. Undoubtedly, the first couple of fights have to be Owen Roddy, Shannon Googly, Owen Roddy Wilson Race, Philip Mulpeter and John Donnelly, you know, all of the Keith Cody and Paul Kauser, all of these fights. If you have any suggestions, please let me know at SevereMMA on Twitter or at Andrew McGahon _. And on Tuesday, actually, we are going to see the SevereMMA office and studio We're moving into an office, we're moving into a studio. A lot more show-based content will be released. As I said earlier on, about really wanting to get to as many amateur shows in 2015. And just to, heads all over the place, just to go away from that completely for a minute, in terms of the amateur shows in 2015, what a great year it's going to be, because we have, let's think alphabetically, we have Akuma, we have Battle Zone, Chaos, Cage Contender, the West Coast Cage Fighting Championship guys, Battle Zone, I've mentioned Battle Zone, Cage Warriors coming back, Akuma, the Kumite, UXC, Immortal Evolution, those two guys still around. Barry Oglesby recently came back to promoting Sprawl Fighting Championships. If we do start to get these shows maybe running in cooperation with each other, so we can have a show maybe every month, that'd be great for us, great for the sport in general, and we will endeavor. I personally will try to get to every single show possible that I can in 2015, and I just want to see as much of the amateur scene as possible now. I think we had a good last 2 years with Severe, like getting there, building our name up and releasing the content, and we appreciate every single